Hello. And welcome to another rousing, fantastic, exciting, splendiferous edition of Philip's Podcast, or minus 10, because you thought I was going to say it. Nice. Today's podcast is going to be on lesson 6.1, finding square roots. Celtic fans out there won't like this, but BTW, I'm going to give a little shout out to my boys in Chicago. Beast mode! How about them Bulls, baby? Getting ready to clinch the Eastern Conference #1 spot. Lesson 6.1, finding square roots. Take a look at our first example, guys. They tell us that the area of this square is 121 feet squared. So we want to know what S is equal to, or the side of the square. One method you can do, ask yourself, what two numbers can you multiply to get 121? To check your answer, 11 times 11 gives you 121. 11 times 11 is 121. So now that we know each side of the square is 11. Or a much easier approach would be to start using in math what we call the square root. The square root of 121 is 11. Easiest way to do that, type 121 into your calculator. Hit that little button on your calculator that looks like this. That's called a square root in math. Bada bing, bada boom. When you do that, you get 11. Now, another way to think of a square root is to think of inverse. Nice vocab, bears. Plus 10. In math, we have all types of inverses. Not sure inverses is a word, but there's several different examples of inverse in math. How's that? Minus 10 bears. For example, the inverse of adding is subtracting. The inverse of multiplying is, nice job, plus 10 for your group, dividing. Here's where this inverse comes into play. The inverse of squaring a number, is square root. Okay, Mr. Phillips, that's nice. What's it mean in English? Right here, guys. Another way to write 11 times 11 is 11 squared. So what I'm trying to get you to realize, the inverse of squaring a number, or the exponent of 2, the inverse of squaring a number, or the exponent of 2, is square root. So let's take a look at a couple more examples. They want us to find the length of the side for this square. They tell you the total area is 2.89 inches squared. So that means I'm going to need two numbers that when I multiply themselves gives me a result of 2.89. Easiest way to do this, take your calculator, type 2.89 into your calculator, hit the square root button, bada bing, bada boom. When you do that, the square root of 2.89 is 1.7. So we say 1.7 times 1.7 gives you 2.9. So each side of this square would be 1.7, don't forget your unit, inches All right, let's take a look at another example. This time they want us to find the length of the side of a square whose total area is 4/9. So that means I'm going to need two fractions that when I multiply them together gives me an answer of 4/9. Okay? A couple different approaches you could use on this one. Take the square root of the fraction 4/9. So I'm going to rewrite it, and I'm going to say the square root of my numerator, nice vocab bears, over the square root of my denominator. If you take a calculator, type 4 square root, that gives you an answer of 2. Take your calculator, type 9 square root, that gives you an answer of 3. So I think that 2/3 times 2/3 gives me 4/9, but I remember top times top, bottom times bottom. Multiplying fractions ain't a problem. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9, so it does work. So 2/3, 2/3, and my unit is feet. So each side of my square is 2/3 of a foot. All right, by the end of this podcast, you should be able to find square roots and also evaluate, nice vocab bears, solve expressions, another nice vocabulary bears, +10, but who's keeping track, involving square roots. All right, some vocabulary words for today's podcast. Positive and negative. Remember, integers are numbers in math that are either positive and negative. And when we're working with square roots sometimes, we're going to end up working with positive and negative numbers. -10 bears. There we go. Perfect square. A perfect square in math is a special number that when you take the square root of it, you don't get a decimal or a remainder. So for example, some perfect squares in math. 1 is a perfect square because if you type into your calculator the square root of 1, you get 1. 4 is a perfect square in math because if you type in the square root of 4, you get 2. 9 is a perfect square in math because if you type into your calculator the square root of 9, you get 3. So there are special numbers in math that we call perfect squares because they come out nice for us. Here's an example of a number that is not a perfect square. Let's say I have 8. And I type into my calculator the square root of 8. When I do that, I get an answer that contains a decimal. What a mess. So we say that 8 is not a perfect square because we have a decimal. Perfect squares do not have a decimal. All right, get rid of this gobbledygook. And let's roll to our next vocabulary word. A radican. A radican is the number underneath the square root sign. So for example, if I asked you to find the square root of 9, 9 is the number underneath your square root sign. So by definition, we say that 9 is the radican in this problem. All right, I'm going to leave that there because I'm going to need it again in just a minute. Radical sign. The radical sign is another name for the square root. Radical sign is that symbol right there that means square root. I already did that one. I already did that one. I already did that one. Come on. There we go. Square root. Two numbers that are the same, that when you multiply them together, give you the radicand. So for example, the square root of 9 would be 3, because 3 times 3 gives you 9. So we say the square root in this problem is 3. All right, I think there's one more vocabulary word hiding out there. Nope, not that one. To square a number. To square a number means to multiply it by itself. So if I square the number 9, that means 9 to the second power, or 9 times 9, which gives me 81. Squaring a number means to multiply it by itself. All right. For my visual people, here's a couple of examples of our vocabulary words that we just went over. When you multiply a number by itself, you square the number. And the symbol for squaring a number is the second power. So when you square 4, that means 4 times 4, which is 16. So 4 squared is equal to 16. To undo this, or the inverse, nice vocabulars, of squaring a number is to take the square root. We talked about earlier, our symbol for square root is a radical sign. Right here, there's our symbol for the square root, the radical sign. The square root of 16 is 4. All right, just a reminder that when you take the square root of a number, it's that number multiplied by itself. So if I go back to the last example, the square root of 16 is 4, because 4 times itself, 4 times 4 is equal to 16. So the square root of a number is that number times itself. Every positive number has a positive and a negative square root. A perfect square is a number with integers as its square root. We did some examples of perfect squares earlier. All right. If you're asked to find the 2 square roots of 49, you would take your calculator and you would say 49 square root. When you do that, you will get 7. What you need to remember is positive 7 times positive 7 equals 49. But don't forget, a negative 7 times a negative 7 is also 49. So don't forget about a negative times a negative is a positive. So we say the square roots of 49 are 7. 7 times 7 is 49. And negative 7. Negative 7 times negative 7 is 49 also. A couple more examples of our vocabulary words. The symbol right here is called a radical sign. This is our radical sign. It's used to find the square root of a number. The number under the radical sign is called the radicand. So right here, 12.25 is our radicand. All right, guys, take a look at this example. They want us to find the square root of negative 9 over 16. I'll show you a couple different ways to work the problem. You pick which strategy you like the best. All right, first strategy, I'm going to ignore the negative like it's not even there. So for now, I'm just going to pretend it's not even there, and I'm going to cover it up. Too bad the Cubs can't do that with their losses. That'd be sweet. I could just ignore that they lost, but it doesn't happen that way. All right, I'm going to rewrite the problem as just a fraction, 9 over 16. Now 9 over 16, there we go, minus 10 bears. 9 over 16 really means 9 divided by 16. So I'm going to take my calculator and I'm going to type in 9 divided by 16. And when I do that, I get an answer of 0.5625. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my radical sign, my square root sign, and I'm going to hit the square root button of 0.5625. When I do that, my calculator says 0.75. I said 0.5625 square root on my calculator, and I got 0.75. Even though I try to forget about the Cubs' losses, I can't do it. I'm going to take my negative sign, and I'm going to put it with my answer. Bada bing, bada boom. We say the square root of negative 9 over 16 is negative 0.75. Or, excellent job, plus 10 for your group. You could say, Mr. Phillips, I'm going to write it as a fraction, 75 cents, 3/4. So you could say negative 3/4. They are equivalent. Plus 10 bears makes up for my Momo over here. Okay, so that's one strategy to work the problem. Here's another strategy to work the problem. I have negative square root 9 over 16. You can think of the problem like this. What is the square root of 9? That would be 3. 3 times 3 is 9. What is the square root of 16? 4 times 4 is 16. Put your fraction bar, and don't forget, can't forget about those Cubbies' loss. We'd like to, but we can't do it. Notice I have the same answers. BRB. All right, guys, take a look at our next example. We want to know the square root, positive and negative square root of 2.25. So we've got some Cubs wins and some Cubs losses, but I'm not going to focus on those right now. I'm just going to focus on baseball because Mr. Phillips loves baseball. So I'm going to ignore the positive and negative symbols for now. And I'm just going to type into my calculator 2.25, and I'm going to hit the square root button. When I do that, the calculator spits out 1.5. Now I'm going to go back and look at the Cubby wins and losses. Yeah, I know. Don't be sarcastic like Mr. Phillips. There's usually more losses than wins, but hey, 103 years. Who's counting? Now I'm going to take my symbols, and I'm going to come over here and put it in front. So technically my answer is positive or negative 1.5. Why? Because 1.5 times 1.5 gives you 2.25. Or For my cubby people out there who are usually in a negative mood, we say a negative 1.5 times a negative 1.5. A negative times a negative gives you a positive. So you should be able to see both problems work. So that's why we include a positive and a negative. All right, a couple more examples. All right, here they want me to evaluate, nice vocabulary, solve these expressions. Excellent job. Plus 10 for your group because you identified the difference between an expression and an equation. An expression does not contain an equal sign. An equation does. Excellent job. Actually, I'll say plus 20 for your group. Nice job. I'm going to rewrite this expression. I see that 5 is touching the radical, the square root of 36. When I see things touching in math, that tells me to multiply. So I'm going to rewrite the problem 5 times the square root of 36 plus 7. I'm going to take my calculator, and I'm going to say, calculator, 36 square root. 36 is a perfect square. Nice job, Bears, plus 10. The square root of 36 is 6. I'll rewrite my problem. 5 times 6 plus 7. Excellent job. You correctly identified. We have to do the order of operations. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So I'm going to multiply first. That gives me 30. I'm going to add 7. That gives me 37. So 37 is the solution to this expression. All right, one more, peeps. You're doing an excellent job. Hang with me. I have 1/4 plus the square root of 18 divided by 2, or 18 halves. A couple different solutions. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, hey, 18 over 2. That really means 18 divided by 2. 18 divided by 2 gives me 9. Now, when I come back, I have 1/4 plus, don't forget your square root sign or your radical. Nice vocabulary, plus 10. I have absolutely no how many points I have, but maybe you're keeping track because, believe it or not, I'm actually not keeping track this time. First time for everything. So now I have the square root of 9. Take a calculator. Type 9 square root. Bada bing, bada boom. Square root of 9 is 3. Excellent job. Plus 20 for your group because you correctly identified that 9 is a perfect square. Excellent job. Rewrite your problem. 1/4 plus 3. Bada bing, bada boom. Nice. 3 and 1/4. A quarter plus $3. $3.25. Or if you want to write it as a mixed decimal, you could say 3.25. Thanks for watching today's podcast on square roots. Stay tuned for our next podcast on lesson 6.2, the Pythagorean theorem.